Hello LinguaFolio online users and welcome. This is our first module in a series of 3 designed to really help you to unlock the potential for LinguaFolio online in your classrooms. As you can see, this first module is all about goal setting and we really hope that you enjoy it. When using LinguaFolio online, it is imperative that teachers discuss the importance of setting goals with students. From the teacher's perspective, goal setting with LinguaFolio online allows for a systematic approach to increasing the functional language use of students. And from the student's perspective, goal setting increases student autonomy by giving students knowledge and know-how regarding how to progress in a language with increasingly less teacher intervention. Today's module will focus mostly on goal setting as it relates to the teacher. As a means of setting goals, teachers must use LinguaFolio online to select focus can-do statements. The overarching purpose of LinguaFolio online is to provide a digital portfolio that documents the ability of students to engage in the functional use of a target language. LinguaFolio online achieves its purpose through its use of the can-do statements created by the National Council of State Supervisors for Languages, or NACESFL, and the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, or ACTFL. Essentially, the can-do statements are statements that represent the various functions of language that students should be able to master at a given proficiency level. The statements are organized into checklists that address the following modes of communication: interpersonal communication, presentational speaking, presentational writing, interpretive listening, and interpretive reading. It is recommended by NACESFL and ACTFL that these checklists be used for setting goals for communication, selecting strategies for communication, self-assessing one's communicative abilities, providing evidence of those abilities, and reflecting on progress before setting new goals. In case you are unfamiliar with the NACESFL-ACTFL can-do statements, here is an example of the interpersonal communication checklist provided to learners of the intermediate mid-proficiency level. As you can see, the checklist is function-based instead of being focused on the acquisition of specific lexical and syntactic knowledge. Given its use of the can-do statements, LinguaFolio Online is a beneficial tool to use when goal setting. A supported way for evaluating one's goals is that of making sure that they are SMART, or SMART goals. This acronym, originally developed by George T. Duran in 1981, is beneficial to consider when evaluating the utility of LinguaFolio Online. First, given that the can-do statements focus on the various functions of language, the communication goals set forth by LinguaFolio Online are very specific. These goals are also measurable. While it is difficult to quantify the functional language use of students, LinguaFolio Online provides mechanisms for both teachers and students to reflect upon student progress towards mastery of the given can-do statements. Also, LinguaFolio Online allows that goals be assignable. Not only are teachers able to group their students by class when creating accounts on LinguaFolio Online, but they may also group students by proficiency level when there are mixed proficiency levels within one class. Given this flexibility and the ability of students to self-select can-do statements to work towards, stakeholders are able to ensure that the goals communicated by LinguaFolio Online are realistic. The only characteristic of SMART goals that LinguaFolio Online does not directly address is that of making sure that the communication goals reflected in each can-do statement are time-related. LinguaFolio Online does not communicate a due date for student achievement of a given can-do statement. However, such a framework can be used provided that the teacher clearly explains his or her expectations regarding pacing to students. Here is an overview of the topics that we will cover in today's module. First, we will discuss deciding what students will study. Next, we will discuss creating a final unit assessment and blending concepts with that assessment. After that, we will discuss guiding student thinking and finally, planning daily goals for your students. The first step in goal setting is to decide how to deliver content to your students. Will you use concepts or big overarching ideas to help students to connect what they are learning in the world language classroom to other subject areas? Will you use context to really drive home the various functions of language and its authentic use? Or will you use textbooks as the main vehicle of content delivery? It is our hope at Castles that you choose a concept-driven approach in the classroom. The first reason why is illustrated by the graphic that you see here. According to Lynn Erickson, long-term retention is achieved when students are able to organize sometimes seemingly disparate facts or strategies, skills, and processes into concepts. Learning becomes even more durable when students are able to link those concepts together and form generalizations. By teaching with concepts, it is simply more likely that students in your classroom will remember what they have learned for years to come. The second reason that we hope that you choose a concept-driven approach is illustrated by the following example. A Spanish 2 teacher knows that she has to teach her students how to narrate in the past. So she turns to her textbook and she decides to use the literature vocabulary given to her and to teach narration in the past through analysis of fairy tales. She realizes after about a week that the textbook's context isn't very relevant to students, and she's disappointed that the book uses translated materials as examples when it could have easily used more culturally relevant texts such as myths and legends. So she changes her approach and instead has students pretend that they are crime scene investigators solving a recent crime in Mexico City. This new context is much more relevant because it allows students to focus on explaining a real event with as much detail as possible. The texts that are used as supporting materials are news clippings, radio broadcasts, and eyewitness accounts of the crime, and the students are able to see and use language authentically. The next year, however, the Spanish 2 teacher wants to improve her unit on narration in the past even more. Keeping with her successful context from the previous year, she decides to teach the unit with the concept of the interplay of perception and reality. In making this shift, the teacher enriches her classroom greatly. The mathematicians color classroom discussions with connections to the golden ratio, and the history buffs point out how much the opinions of those who are documenting history influence the perceptions of generations to come. This connection prompts the class to consider the justice system and what happens to individuals who are wrongly accused of crimes as they continue to solve their own crime. The teacher notices that not only is her classroom more rich, but groups of students who never really cared about world language before now see its relevance. Making the transition to concept-based education is not easy and is not something that can happen overnight. To inspire thinking, here is a list of possible concepts that one could use in the language classroom. For some teachers, using concepts becomes more meaningful when, instead of using just one concept, the teacher uses a statement that links multiple concepts, or a generalization. For example, while teaching only balance or teaching only relationships may seem dull or nebulous, teaching the idea that balance affects relationships is more concrete and more salient for many teachers. If you are transitioning to concept-based education, we do have a few recommendations. The first is that you discuss your content and the various functions of the language that you are teaching with someone from another content area. As has already been alluded to, concepts are relevant across disciplines, and in speaking to a teacher from a different content area, it is likely that crystallizing the concept or concepts that you are going to use will be easier than if you work at it alone. Also, if you try to change everything at once, you are likely to get frustrated and overwhelmed. Start with a few units at a time and spend the brain power that you need to really use concepts well. The next school year, refine what you have already done and take on a few units more. The more that you do it, the easier and faster it will be.
This discussion brings us to our next step in goal setting, and that is the step of coming up with your final unit assessment. If you are using concept-based instruction, make sure that the assessment allows the student to explore the concept that you are teaching. In doing so, you ensure that the assessment is exactly what it needs to be: skill-based, student-driven, and culturally and pragmatically relevant. You can also achieve these three characteristics through the selection of a very good context for communication. Thus, if you struggle with concept-based education, never fear. Your final unit assessments can still be very strong. Please note that a final unit assessment really isn't summative. We like to use that word because it comes at the end of a given unit of study, but language never stops building. For example, there is no way that I can tell students to learn the verb to be for one unit and then not expect them to still know how to use it for subsequent units of study. Also, make sure that your final unit assessments don't reward simple memorization. While the knowledge acquired through memorization is important, if the students can't use the knowledge to understand and to create language, it is essentially useless. A good way to test if your assessment is too driven by memorization is to see if it can be graded by a machine. If the assessment can be graded by a machine, we urge you to go back and add some more communicative tasks.
In order to help educators to set goals while using Linguafolio Online, we have developed the Linguafolio Online Unit Planner. As you can see, the first sections of the unit planner are dedicated to helping educators to articulate the big picture of a given unit of study. In completing these steps, educators list the concept or concepts related to a unit of study and explain how those concepts will be addressed in the final unit assessment. You can also see that educators must indicate what main indicator or overarching can-do statement or statements will serve as the focus for the students. Here is an example of the first two steps of the unit planner filled out for you so that you may see it used in practice. Step 1 involves the simple logistics of a unit and is quite easy to do. Step 2, however, involves much more thinking on the part of the educator. Here we've articulated the two concepts of perception and reality, and we've chosen that our unit will explore how those concepts interplay. In order to achieve this exploration, learners will create two social media profiles. One is based off of real information and the other is based off of fake information. Then they will look at the profiles created by their classmates and choose a potential friend and write an introductory letter to that friend. After they write the letter, learners will reveal if the profiles that were written to were based off of fake information or real information. The main indicator that is most directly related to this entire unit of study is I can write information about my daily life in a letter, blog, discussion board, or email message. The next step in goal setting is to figure out what questions you are going to use to guide student thinking. It is recommended that you think about these questions in the tiered way suggested by Costa before teaching a unit of study. The level 2 and 3 questions are harder to come up with than level 1 questions, and if you don't spend time thinking on the front end, it can be harder to come up with them on the spot. For example, if I am teaching our example unit and running late one day, in my haste to make sure that my students have a question to guide their thinking during class, I may pick, how do I make adjectives agree? While this question is fine, it never requires the students to know how to process and apply the information that they are learning in class, something that all teachers must try to do on a daily basis. Level 1 questions are straightforward and elicit basic knowledge from students. They can usually be answered in 1 to 2 words and are objective in nature. For the questions listed here, there is only one straightforward answer, adjectives and yes respectively. Level 2 questions are more conceptual. If a student is able to answer them, the teacher knows that the student is able to use the knowledge mastered at level 1. For example, if a student is able to compare and contrast descriptions in the target language with descriptions in his or her first language, the teacher knows that the student understands agreement and placement of adjectives in practice. The level 3 questions, those which require applying of information, especially in new contexts, are very good for building student inquiry and interest. They are entirely subjective and can elicit a myriad of answers. For example, there is no right answer to the question listed here: to what extent is perception more important than reality? However, there are good answers that are well justified and show a true understanding of forming descriptions, and there are bad answers that prove no level 1 or 2 knowledge. It is important to note that at lower proficiency levels, students may not be able to discuss level 3 questions fully in the target language. That is absolutely okay. What you lose in some time spent in the target language, you will gain in increased student interest and buy-in. The last step in goal setting is to articulate which can-do statements are related to the main indicator or main indicators chosen for a unit. Here is a page from our unit planner that allows you to do just that. So that you can see this section of the unit planner in practice, we have filled in the boxes here that are relevant to the goal setting for our example unit. We've taken our main indicator, or our overarching can-do statement of I can write information about my daily life in a letter, blog, discussion board, or email message, and the content that the students need, and have broken it up into the related can-do statements. Statements that do not all come from the same mode of communication as the main indicator. We made this decision because it is imperative to allow learners to practice the content being taught in all communicative modes. Also, please note that educators may have learners revisit can-do statements from past units of study. This decision is both appropriate and encouraged. Before filling in the unit planner featured on the previous slide, it is helpful for teachers to look at the necessful actful can-do statements and pick the ones that are most relevant to the content being taught, as has been done here. For a worksheet that helps educators in this planning, please visit the LFO network and download the welcome packet. This packet includes all of the planning tools that we have created for educators. As you continue to embed LinguaFolio online in your classroom, don't forget to encourage your students to progress beyond the can-do statements that you have assigned. LinguaFolio Online should be a tool that not only allows for meaningful formative assessment by the teacher, but also allows for meaningful self-evaluation on the part of the student. As you are able, help and encourage students to work on their own goals to supplement the ones that you have set for them. This training module was funded by the U.S. Department of Education under grant number P229A14004. Contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education nor imply endorsement by the federal government. Thank you so much for watching, and please send us an email at lfolio@uoregon.edu if you have any questions.